The Loop.
The Loop. You have the divine spark. The Loop.
Do or do not. There is no try.
The Loop.
Give me your board.
Hey there, this is Misha, and welcome to episode number 12 of The Loop, the podcast where I interview top experts and career coaches to unpack their advice on everything from what it's like to work in a specific company to expectations and roles to how to level up, how to get the job interview, how to ace the job interview, and a lot more. Today's conversation is with Roman Yusufov, who was an Amazon engineer for over 9 years. He worked in multiple teams, including Amazon Marketplace, Amazon Alexa, and Amazon Logistics. He also served as a bar raiser for 5 years and has interviewed over 300 people in various roles, technical and non-technical. So today's conversation was really insightful. We talked a lot about Roman's story, how we got into Amazon, his interview process, and also how the company has changed over the last decade. And we also dive into a little more detail into Amazon's expectations of engineers and how the teams are structured, the different levels of engineers. So there's some nitty gritty stuff in there that was pretty interesting. We also talk about how the hiring panel works, what a bar raiser is, what they're looking for, and also, yeah, we cover a lot. I think we spoke about the Amazon work culture. Obviously, it's got a bad rap in the last few years since the New York Times article, but we go into that and sort of the truth and caveats around that and sort of Roman's perspective and story. And then just a bunch of tips for interviewing at Amazon. So I think this is a really, really interesting conversation. If you're interested in Amazon as a company in general, sort of what they're doing, even if you're not interviewing there, I think it was a pretty fun and useful conversation. And if you think any of that sounds interesting at all, then I think you are going to enjoy this conversation. Hey, Roman, thanks for joining me.
Hey, Misha. It's good to be here, man.
Yeah, man. So I'm excited for our chat today. You've been doing a lot of coaching recently, and I am curious to talk to you about
I've been
your experience at Amazon,
about
what it's like to be an engineer, and sort of like get into that and sort of see where that conversation takes us. I've actually personally worked with Amazon in the past, so I've got quite a bit of info about them already, but I haven't worked so much on the engineering side, so I'm really curious to ask you about that. So I guess for starters, could you maybe share a little bit of context about your background, sort of how long you were at Amazon and what you were doing there?
Yeah, so I've been in the tech industry for almost 20 years, if you count all my internship experience and everything else. The first 8 to 10 years I spent at IBM, and then about 9 years ago I came to Amazon. So that was a big transition for me because I came from a different background than what Amazon does, which is mostly web-based. It's also a different culture. So that was probably one of the biggest things for me, was adjusting to the culture and the work environment and working in these smaller teams to work independently. And then so as an engineer, there's a certain path of progression. I came in as an L5 engineer, SD2, and then I was promoted to a senior engineer, which is an SD3, some years later. And so there's the tech stuff that you have to learn, but you also have to learn the ins and outs of how to operate within Amazon as a company. Mm-hmm. And that's both culture and also like learning how to take on more responsibility, how to lead teams and things of that sort. And so one kind of tidbit that I share with people I coach is that don't think of the interview as just a process you go to get a job. Mm-hmm. Think of the interview as like a mini version of the job, because then you're able to practice the skills that you're going to be using in your job anyways. So it's not like a throwaway effort where you just do it and then you start the job and that's when the real world starts. It's really just a way to prepare for doing the job at Amazon.
I like that. I like that framing. And this is echoing what a lot of people have said already, I think, in some different episodes about going in and when you're in the interview, acting like that person is already your colleague, like they're already your teammate, and you're sort of spitballing ideas and having a real conversation instead of sort of preparing for a test or an exam. So I think that's sort of in line with what you're saying. Um, yeah. So what were you doing, and like what kind of projects, what kind of teams were you working in at Amazon?
Yeah, when I started in Amazon Marketplace, which is the part of Amazon that deals with third party sellers. So when you buy stuff on Amazon, there's like the retail part of Amazon where Amazon sells stuff directly
Mm-hmm.
to buyers, and then there's the third party business which other sellers sell on Amazon. And so we're helping build out tools
Mm-hmm.
in that part of the business. And I spent several years there in kind of different areas. Then after that, I moved to Alexa because that was just a brand new thing being built up. And I worked on the communication piece of Alexa, calling and messaging through the Alexa devices. And so that was just very exciting because it's a brand new space, greenfield projects. I got to work, like build stuff really from the ground up that hasn't been done at the company or anywhere else before.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was there for a few years. After that, I went to logistics. So we helped launch some improvements in deliveries, like 1-day shipping. So just the scale was massive because we're touching every package that goes out to customers. So that's just a different set of problems that I had to deal with. And then finally, my last year or so, I went back to the marketplace business, building tools for brands. So I feel like I got a good overview of kind of different areas, different types of problems, different types of organizations in my career.
Got it. And were you a software engineer in all those roles, or like what was your role exactly?
Yeah, I was an engineer all the way through, so
Okay.
I didn't venture out into other areas.
Cool.
But one thing I did get to do throughout my tenure there was also interviewing, right?
Okay.
So because the way things work at Amazon is you're an engineer, kind of in your day job,
Mm-hmm.
but you also help out with the interviews and bringing new talent on board. And that's another thing that I really enjoyed. That's why I got into, first I got into just interviewing candidates, and then I got trained as a bar raiser, which means I got to actually drive the interviewing process. And it's really like interesting to see that aspect of the company that most people don't get to see.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm really curious about Alexa because I was, I think I was an early adopter, or I would consider myself an early adopter. And I actually don't really use it very much anymore. I don't know. I just sort of forgot about it. I don't know what happened. It's hard to like sort of get me to use it again because it's not like not on my phone. So, you can't really send me a notification. It's just like this device that's sitting there. But what was it like? Tell me about what it was like working on that team. I'm just curious what the environment was like and sort of, like how the teams were structured, like how you guys were building that.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty scrappy. It's probably one of the scrappiest teams I've ever worked on. Now, the way teams are structured at Amazon in general is you work in teams of 8 people, and they call them the 2 pizza teams because supposedly 2 pizzas can feed 8 people. And that's how the legend
Depends
goes.
on how big the pizza is.
Yeah, that's the Amazon legend from Jeff Bezos days.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when we started, it was we were still building a team, so just a handful of us. And we were in a space that we've never worked in before. So like initially we're helping out get the calling features to production. And a lot of calling has to do with, networking stuff and dealing with like third-party providers that help route the calls, just all this kind of stuff that most engineers don't think about. And it's something I didn't think about until I started there. And so we kind of went pretty deep and low level when working on the calling stuff. And then we got transitioned to supporting messaging, which you can think of as like Facebook Messenger for Alexa. So it's essentially building that kind of service from the ground up. And there's a whole set of other challenges because now you got to deal with, the Alexa devices, you got to deal with Alexa app, you got to deal, with all these different ways for people to communicate and try to build something that can accommodate all that and give you the right user experience, the right speed and everything else. So there's a lot of like moving fast and trying things and seeing if they work and how customers respond to them.
And how much, I mean, obviously it's super data driven, customer obsessed company. We can talk more about that, but what, like you guys are moving fast and, there's some assumptions you're testing, but you're also, like you also don't have all the data necessarily. It's maybe even harder with this aspect of like, it's not just purely online. So, were you guys just making a lot of judgment calls based on your experience as users also? Like you could physically, have this object and test it out. Was that more of a thing for you versus just like on the marketplace where, it's a bit of a different game?
Yeah, the stuff I worked on previously was like, we already had an existing user base for that type of product. So we're building tools for sellers, for example. Like we know sellers need tools, so we're just building stuff for them, just making sure that their needs are being met. In this case, we're building something brand new, right? Nobody has asked for it yet. It's something that we're like, hey, we're going to put it out there and see how it resonates with people. So yeah, a lot of it was us testing it ourselves and just going through exercises of like getting a few people together and be like, well, does this make sense? Does this experience make sense? Like, how do we build this in a way that people actually want to use this? So yeah, initially there's no data to validate the ideas. It's kind of us brainstorming and thinking through things. And I mean, we have, I think, a couple patents that came out of my work there because it's all brand new stuff, right? Nobody's done it before.
And then you're talking about the two pizza rule, small teams, and also the other thing I've heard is that with Amazon's 16 leadership principles, those are not just values that they've got written on the wall somewhere. These are actually used in day-to-day work and referenced and or at least thought about. Is that what you found to be true in your work at Amazon or in this team?
Yeah, so like coming from my previous company, we had something analogous to the leadership principles, but I feel like it's something we would recite at like a performance review time just to make sure we knew them, and then we would never mention them again for the rest of the year. And at Amazon, it was kind of woven into the fabric of the company. So that's why I say, like, when you prepare for the interview, you're not just preparing for this process to get in the company. That's your gateway to the work itself. So yeah, everything we do at Amazon is framed in terms of the leadership principles. And I mean, to be honest, I've used it in my own life, right? Because, bias for action, taking action, not overthinking things, like some of the kind of common sense things that apply everywhere.
For sure.
Yeah, but like, throughout the work, like when you're working on projects, you're always thinking in terms of these leadership principles and the key metrics that you want to deliver for customers and for the company itself.
Got it. I know it was a while ago, but do you remember your interview process?
Yeah,
for Amazon.
I remember like it was yesterday.
It sounds like it was very traumatic or eventful.
Well, it was. Yeah, it was different for me because I did my phone screen because I actually lived, in a different city at the time. Okay. And I applied for a position not knowing if Amazon was in Arizona or not. Like they said they were, but I didn't trust them at the time. So I applied on a whim, and then they did a phone screen, and I didn't hear back from them for like 3 or 4 weeks. And I assumed I didn't get the job. And so I just emailed the recruiter. I'm like, I at least deserve an answer, right? If I don't get it, that's fine, but at least let me know. And then they're like, yeah, we're going to fly out to Seattle next week, like in 2 weeks. So it's pretty quick. And then I was like, all right, I got to study for this because I haven't taken an interview in like 8-9 years. So yeah, I was like cramming. I was going through my data structures book. I got to Seattle and I couldn't really sleep at night. So I got there like an hour earlier before the interview started. So I was just hanging out there. But I do remember when I went through my process, they actually told me at the time who my bar raiser was, and he was the first person I talked to. And he put me so much at ease that by the time we got through his interview, I forgot I was interviewing. I was just like having a casual conversation.
That's awesome. Yeah.
With like a colleague.
Yeah, that's often the opposite of what I would imagine a bar raiser would be like. But I was talking to another bar raiser recently, and she was saying like bar raisers are trained interviewers, right? And they're supposed to be really good. And so oftentimes it doesn't feel like a difficult interview, even though they're taking notes, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. I've heard from a lot of candidates they're like, oh, you were bar raiser, you're going to give me the hardest interview. And it's really not the hardest. It's just I'm better at asking questions, the right questions. Hopefully I'm not bombarding you with like a bunch of questions that don't matter. I can really get to the point and then just guide you along through the process. Whereas somebody that's less experienced, they might, take a little longer to get there.
For sure. So how technical was your interview process? Like, did you have a technical screen and then a bunch of behavioral interviews, or what was it like?
Yeah, so typically for a software developer, it's 4 to 5 interviews, and it depends on which org you're applying for. They're always experimenting with new formats. I think for me it was 5 interviews, and I did at least probably 3 coding questions, system design question, and then a bunch of behavioral stuff.
Okay. What was your favorite part and your least favorite part?
I think for me, like thinking back on it, I could tell the level of expertise of the interview, just the level of experience. Because I remember certain questions I came out of, like I had fun, right? I just solved the problem. They helped me along, like working with a colleague. I remember there was one technical question where I was asking the interviewer questions and they weren't giving me anything. I was like, well, which direction do you want me to go in? And they were just like, just make it up. And so I felt like I was getting no guidance at all. And I was like, I'm not even sure I'm solving the right problem. And so having been on that end of things, I kind of appreciate like how important it is to have a good experience as a candidate. Like regardless of the outcome, you want to have that experience where you're being guided and you feel like you're making progress.
Yeah, that's frustrating, right? Because you have prepared a lot, and then I think what you're sort of hinting at is there's different levels of interviewers. They have some of them are trained, some of them have been interviewing for a long time, and so they're good at having that conversation, really assessing you, while others are just a little bit less experienced. So they may come off as maybe a little bit cold, or maybe just not as helpful in that situation. So it can sort of be a bad experience. It doesn't mean you're going to fail that interview, right? It's just you remember that moment. So do you have any advice for people that, I mean, if you're in that situation, is there anything you can really do, or you just put a smile on your face and do your best?
Yeah, I think for me, one thing I realized is just put my skill set out there, right? So I had the knowledge that I had. Like I couldn't, in preparation, it's really not about cramming the knowledge. It's really just knowing how to present the knowledge. Because, my knowledge came from my experience, from years of experience, and I wasn't going to change what I knew in a short period of time. But what I could do is present it in the best way possible and not stress over it, and then let the company make a decision. So, and that's where, on the interviewer side, our goal is to guide the candidate through the process, because nobody's going to nail everything 100%. But I want to position you, let you present yourself in the best way possible, whatever that is for you.
That makes sense. So to talk to me more about that interview. So you were talking to the bar raiser. You had a hiring manager, I guess that's part of that, and some other people. Was it people on your team, outside of your team? How did that look like?
So that process that I had isn't necessarily representative of what most people see today. But when I was going through interviewing, I believe most of the people I talked to were not on my team. It was also challenging because I was applying for a position in Arizona and I was being interviewed in Seattle. So there were like some sister teams that provided some interviewers to interview me. Nowadays, most of the time, you will be speaking with somebody from the team you're applying for, especially now that everything is remote and we have video and all of that. At the time, it was all in person, so it was a little bit different.
Got it. So when you got the offer, what was and you started like first like 90 days, what was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, for one thing, when I got the offer, I was shocked because I had like a 30% pay increase over my previous job, and
you didn't even ask for it; they just gave it to you.
Yeah, because like I was thinking, if I get a 10% increase, it'll be worth it for me to move. And when they gave me the 30%, I'm like, this is a no-brainer at this point. Like I can't say no to this. But when I started my actual work, like I felt pretty much out of place. And I've actually talked to some people about it since then. I feel like every time I've switched to a new role, I felt imposter syndrome. Like, what am I doing here? Like, why did they even hire me? And what didn't help was the background that I came from was very different in terms of the actual tech stack and everything that I worked on. And so I was like, did they mishire me? Like, why did they, make me an offer in the first place?
Yeah.
But one thing that I did learn was that, at least at Amazon, I think probably most FAANG companies, they interviewed differently. Because I thought they would hire me for my knowledge of specific tech stacks, but what they really want is my ability to pick up new knowledge, my ability to learn new things. Just kind of the higher level skills, like design skills, knowing how to code in general, having the right fundamentals, because all these specifics can be picked up and they have to be picked up.
Right.
Because technology moves so fast that even within the same company, you're going to have to relearn the same things multiple times.
That makes sense. Yeah. So a little bit of imposter syndrome coming in, and then I guess after some time that went away, you sort of picked up those skills, and then was there? Did you find like there was a pretty good onboarding at the time, or did you just have to sort of go and figure stuff out on your own?
Well, we were a remote site, so we were like a site of 20 people.
Okay.
Like today, that site is like 1,000 people, but we were pretty kind of bootstrapped. Like I literally had a physical box that I had to install Linux on to even start my work, because nobody was there. We didn't have IT support. We didn't have any of that at the time. So
Wow.
yeah, so a lot of it was like self-driven, self-learned. I mean, when we talk about ownership and delivering results and all of that, like that was my first week. It's just like setting up my own work environment so I can even start working.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So let's talk more about being an engineer at Amazon, and like I guess maybe more high level, but then also if you want to share some details or some stories around that, like obviously every company is different and there's different levels. You know, in Amazon you've got the level like L whatever to L12 and L5, L6, L7. What level did you come in at, and sort of what were the expectations around that, and maybe share like a little bit more about levels and how that works?
Yeah, leveling is at the time I didn't realize that leveling is very company specific. I just assumed like across different companies it's like it would be the same level. So in my previous job I made it to, I guess, 2 levels from entry level, right? So I got promoted twice, and so I assumed when I was coming into Amazon I would also be coming in 2 levels from entry level. And so the Amazon entry level is L4. So that's usually new college graduates or people with just a little bit of industry experience. L5 is SDE2. So that's people that are coming. Most people come in as L5s because they have some amount of industry experience, maybe 5-6 years, but they haven't made it into kind of a leadership position yet, like a tech lead position. And then L6 is a senior SDE. And the biggest kind of differentiating factors, that's when you start to really lead bigger, like one or more teams. You start to build designs that kind of are bigger in nature, and the decisions you make as an L6 have a lot more impact. So that's why like the interview process is a little bit different, because we have to make sure that people brought into that position, they validate their decisions better. They can work with people, they can coach other people. So like they're really acting as a team lead, even though we don't have, like Amazon doesn't have official team lead roles.
What is you said the interview process is a little bit different for L6. How is that?
Yeah, so there's a bigger focus on system design. System design is relevant for L5s as well. So I guess one example would be like an L4 would be working on one feature, right? They're writing code for something that they were assigned. L5 might be designing some component, like maybe they're designing a new small service on their own. But L6 would be designing a whole system where it's a bunch of services that interact with each other, that interact with external systems, a lot of dependencies. So there's a lot more focus on system design and scalability and extensibility, just making sure that the decisions they make stand the test of time. And then on the behavioral side, it's also about kind of thinking big, making the right decisions, coaching and mentoring others, kind of playing that leadership role in the team.
And then what about L7, L8?
So yeah, I personally left when I was in L6. L7 is a principal engineer, and they usually essentially advisors to like whole orgs, right? So we'd have like director or sometimes VP level orgs with hundreds of people, and they set like the technical vision, technical direction. And so it's just like another order of magnitude bigger scope, because now they're not driving a single system, a single product. They're driving a set of products for a whole organization. And then
you said that's below director.
They would devise a director. So they would work as an advisor to a director. L8 is a senior principal, and at that point, like they're way above. I don't have all the details of what they do, but they like think of it just another level higher. Right? They might be working with the VP or higher and advising them. I think there's a couple more levels. There's like a distinguished engineer and a fellow, but there's like a handful of people in the whole company there at those positions.
Got it. So yeah, most people are coming in as L5 and then going to stay around L5, L6. And if you want to move up into more complex systems and management, then maybe you'll go higher than that. But you can easily stay at that level 5, level 6, and then like transfer to different departments and like work on cool projects?
Yeah, those could be career levels. So you could stay at those levels. I think beyond L5, it's up to the person if they're motivated, because a lot of people think of promotions as kind of rewards for working hard, but it's really a transition to a different position because there's a different skill set required for each one. And so nobody will force you to move to a higher level because you have to want it and really work hard to get there.
Got it. Okay, cool. So what else? Do you have any stories you want to share from your time as an engineer? I think before we hit record, you were saying that you might have some crazy stories, and I'm wondering if that's around being an engineer at Amazon, or if it was something else.
Well, I think in general, just watching a site growing from 20 people. When I joined, there was literally like we knew each other by name, like we had a small space, and then just watching like the explosive growth of the team and the projects that were on site. Because when I joined, like my only option was like one of two teams to work on. And if we had a visitor from Seattle, like a VP or director, somebody come in, that was like a big deal because they were like felt like they had to come down to us. And then at this point the site became so big that we had like our own like directors, and we had like a full orgs present on site. And so just kind of seeing that growth and the evolution of the company itself too, because over time the company changed and the direction changed. Like AWS became a big thing. When I started, it was just basically getting off the ground. So there's a lot of interesting things that I've seen in terms of just the company itself and the way that it grew over time. Like a lot of transitions, a lot of uncertainty, but also, when I started, the Amazon stock was $300. Yeah. And then up until this year, it was like a 3,000. So it was a very rewarding journey too.
Awesome. I was going to ask you just about the role or like the view of engineers and like where they sit, like how Amazon views engineers. Because if you look at Google, or at least earlier days of Google, I think that they only hired people like PhDs and like the best engineers. And obviously that's changed a little bit because they've gotten a lot bigger. And so it was like a very engineering and like innovation, tech driven, right? It's like there has to be some technological innovation that we are creating, and it's less about services and more about innovation. And that was one reason Google is very, very engineering driven. But how does Amazon see engineers like internally? Are you guys sort of like gods amongst employees, or are you like, how do you feel as an engineer?
Yeah, so I'll actually tell you a question that I remember asking one of my interviewers when I was interviewing for Amazon, because I didn't even know if I wanted to work for Amazon at the time, because I didn't know what Amazon was. Like in my head, I was like, is this a retail company? Is it like just a big store with some engineers? Or is this a tech company that also happens to sell stuff? And so at the time, they told me that it's a tech company that also has a retail side of it. And I didn't really buy into it until I started working there. But like being inside the company, there's all the operation stuff. Like there's the warehouses, logistics stuff. And that's like just one part of the company, but there's a huge tech community, right? There's a huge tech part of the company. And it's very much like a tech-driven company. So engineers are the core of what the company does, which I think, for a lot of people might be different than what they've experienced in the past. Where as engineers, we actually get to drive things, right? We get to come up with new initiatives. We get to pitch them to our leadership, and then we get to make decisions in how we deliver product. And that's kind of what I enjoyed the most as I was moving up, because as I was getting more senior, it wasn't just me like executing on something. I actually got to have a word in what we're building and how we're building it, and then what are the features we're shipping to customers.
Awesome. Okay, so that's a pretty good role to have. Cool. So do you want to talk a bit more about maybe like the interview process in detail? Because like you were a bar raiser, right? Like you said, so you were interviewing a bunch of people. You're trained as a bar raiser. Can you talk a little bit more about? I'm actually really curious about the training. How did they train you to be a bar raiser?
Yeah, it was it was about 6 months, but it varies for people.
Okay.
And there's like different phases. So the first phase is making sure that we are good interviewers.
Mm-hmm.
And so the way we did that is like we actually had an existing bar raiser who would shadow us on interviews and give us
Mm-hmm.
feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I say like that bar raisers are the best interviewers at a company because they're learning from the best, right? They're getting
Mm-hmm.
that direct feedback from people that are already in those positions.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second part, which I probably can't go super into detail about, but that's more about how do you actually drive the interview process, the decisions around interviews. Because like there's the visible part of the bar raiser work, which is what the candidates would see in interviews.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be just a better interviewing experience.
Yeah.
But they're also doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes to make sure that, you know, we're arriving at the right decisions, that everybody's calibrated, that,
I
you
see.
know, because, you know, you're talking to 5 different people, and the 5 different people have different experiences, different levels of expertise in interviewing. And so the bar raiser is like a single focal point that's helping make sure that everybody's aligned and everybody's looking at things objectively, and we're driving the right decisions for the company.
Right. So you almost have like ownership in a way over that interview process, even though you're not the hiring manager, right? Like you want to make sure people are uh, like there's no gaps in communication, understanding, and everyone's on the same page, and so it sort of feels like you're the glue or something there that it's like a pretty important role.
Yeah, the bar raiser community helps define the interviewing process. Like all the innovations usually go through the bar raiser community to make sure that they approve it, because we're kind of like the custodians of the interview process.
Yeah.
We're making sure that there's, you know, the right level of quality, that the right processes are in place, that we're, you know, being fair,
Yeah.
etc.
So you saw it change over many years, and obviously like new leadership principles were added over time. The interview process changed. Uh, Obviously the company grew a lot. What what was that like? I mean, did you see it become more efficient? Like the interview process just got a lot better. Like what was that? What was that like, or what did it look like?
I think it's like anything else. Like I always think of the interview process as a product, and like with
Mm-hmm.
any product that we've built at Amazon, we're always experimenting, always trying new things, and always refining it. So like when I was interviewing, I believe the process was you would have to go through 2 phone screens, and then you would have your on-site interview with like 5 interviewers, right?
Yeah.
So over time, you know, they've added the online assessments, and so now, you know, they don't always do phone screens, and different teams always experiment with different formats. So like some teams will do 4 interviews instead of 5. So from that point of view, the process changed. One thing I will tell you is I remember doing my interview. So it was like a 5-hour long interview, right? And it spanned lunchtime. And so one of the interviewers, which is a manager, he's like, "Hey, let's go have some lunch."
Mm-hmm.
But I had an interview with another company a couple months earlier. And when they told me that, I was like, all right, I'm going to go eat some lunch. So I was sitting there just eating lunch. And I'm like, why is this manager continuing to talk to me while I'm eating? Just give me a break. And then I realized that was an interview.
Yeah.
And so having had that experience going into Amazon, I was like, oh, so this is a lunch interview. So that was a challenging thing, because like you're trying to eat and you're trying to talk to the manager and think through the questions at all times. So one thing they got rid of was the lunch interviews. They're like, we're not going to do it anymore. Well, like if it spans a lunchtime and if it's in person, we'll give the candidate just an hour off to go have their lunch. So there've been just little improvements over the years that kind of really help the candidate experience, so it's not so stressful and just like back to back and nonstop.
Yeah, I feel like a lunch interview is kind of nice in a way, because it's maybe you calm down a bit, you're more relaxed, you know, it's more of a casual setting, and so you could open up a little bit. But then at the same time, I could see you just being nervous and just like shoving food in your mouth and rushing to eat.
If you're being evaluated, so what they do nowadays is, and this has changed since COVID, but when we were doing in-person interviews, they would give a lunch buddy, just somebody like an engineer on the team. They would just go talk to you, right? Tell you about the team. So it wasn't, because usually in the interviews you're being evaluated for something, right? And that puts pressure. But if you can just get to have a casual conversation with somebody, you can get to enjoy your lunch and then also learn a little bit more about the company as well.
Yeah. So you're saying that you, like many things, you see the interview process as a product, and having been a bar raiser and like interviewing lots of people, is there something you would do to improve this product that you feel hasn't been done or do you have any ideas on how it could be improved?
So one thing I've seen, like I've been on some forums lately, like Blind, and I know one thing people keep mentioning is that why do we still use lead code type of questions in interviews? And I think that's a valid point because on the one hand, we want to be able to see if the candidate has the technical abilities, but it might be like a better experience to give them real world problems or problems that we could potentially be solving at the company instead of just kind of more arbitrary questions. I know there was a trend at one point in time where like Google and other companies, they were asking like puzzle type questions.
Yeah.
And they've migrated away from that because they realized it in no way correlates to candidates' performance on the job. So it could be something similar, right? I mean, I think asking those technical coding questions does assess somebody's technical ability, but we could also kind of tailor more to the company, to real world problems, to kind of pound a little more on that point, and that this is really like a collaborative, kind of like a mini version of the job versus we're just asking you questions as part of the interviewing process. If that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense, and I think this is what someone I was talking to, Phil, he was at Google as an engineer. He was saying the same thing. Like he was saying that you could hypothetically get all the answers wrong in the interview, like the coding or technical system design answers wrong. But if you've worked through the problem together and shown your problem solving ability and it makes sense with the interviewer, then you can still get the job. Right. So I think that's in line with what you're saying. It's like, if you're solving a problem, a real world problem, like that's it. That's the job, right? Why wouldn't we hire you?
Yeah, there's a reason that at least at Amazon, I don't know how it happens at other companies, is that we ask multiple coding questions because there's so many different variables that can affect somebody's performance on one particular question. Mm-hmm. And so we never count a single question as a deciding factor, right? We look at the overall, like how strong is a candidate technically. And if they happen to miss one question, well, maybe it's just, they had a bad hour, or it's just that one thing they didn't know, or they felt stressed, whatever it is, right? It could be various factors.
Yeah, I'm really interested to know more about that, because I think if I'm going in for an interview with Amazon, and then let's say I've got 5 interviews and one of them doesn't go well, it's like very clear that it's just or at least I think it doesn't go well. And let's say I fail that interview or get a bad mark or however it works. But then 4 other interviewers like me, like how does the decision-making process actually look like in the hiring panel? Like how do you guys decide?
Yeah, so without going like into too much detail, it's really about just looking at because there's certain things that I can't like discuss in detail, but it's really just an overall assessment of the candidate. And I think like even in failure, you can still demonstrate things, right? It's not like behavioral aspects and technical aspects, they're not separate. And if you think about it in terms of like the actual job, right, you're going to fail at your job at some point. You're going to do something where you introduce a bug or you do something wrong. And it's really how you handle it that's going to matter. And so even in failure, you can still demonstrate positive data points because you take responsibility, like, oh, that's my mistake. I made the wrong assumption at the beginning, right? Or if you're given hints along the way, well, are you able to take those hints and then kind of turn a negative into positive and still come up to a solution, even if you didn't get it all on your own? So there's a lot of like little nuances around outside of just whether this binary view of whether you got the problem or not.
Yeah. Well, I want to push on that more because I know some of it's like top secret and that's fine. But are you guys taking a vote? Like, is it like everyone raises their hands like, yes, I want to hire this person, or no, I don't want to hire this person? Then you debate it, or could you like speak at a high level?
Yeah, there's definitely debate. We talk about the pros and cons. It's not like a simple like yes or no. There's some nuance too. Mm-hmm. There's the rubric of how we assess candidates. So it's not like an arbitrary kind of ambiguous thing. It's more well defined so that we're given a fair treatment across all candidates.
Yeah, you have like, I think I remember reading before, it's like you have like, weak hire or like strong hire. There's like some levels, right, in between.
It's there's different ways of rating the candidates in different areas of the interview.
And as a bar raiser, can you veto that and just make the decision yourself, or does it still have to be sort of democratic?
The goal is to drive to have a consensus, right? Because all the interviewers are there. So, because the goal of the bar raiser is not to the bar raiser doesn't single-handedly make a decision, because then that would defeat the interview process.
Okay.
There's a reason we have multiple people, because bar raisers can make mistakes too, right? And so their goal is really to kind of lead the process. They're not like the deciders. They're more the leaders of the process.
Okay. They're the leaders, but then at the same time, you are the bar raiser, so you're trying to raise the bar. So if that person is not raising the bar, then that's not good, right? Because you're the one assessing whether they're raising the bar. So, that interview with the bar raiser is pretty important. Okay, sorry. Yeah, tell me.
So that's not quite right in the sense that
okay,
everybody's trying. So every candidate that comes into the company has to raise the bar.
Okay.
And the goal of the interviewing process is to ensure that they're raising the bar. I mean, the bar raisers are kind of just the keepers of that standard.
I see. You just have that title. It's not necessarily like you're not the only person assessing whether they're raising the bar.
Correct. Yeah. So I think the historical nature of the name is just like they're the people that were making sure that the candidates are raising the bar.
I see.
But they're not the only people making sure. They're just kind of like the last line of defense, right? If everything else fails, you have the bar raiser there to make sure the process goes right.
Okay, makes sense. And then in these situations I've had, so I was a recruiter for a while and was working with Amazon in Japan, or like on the agency side. So I was in the office a lot though, and I noticed sometimes that person would go through the interview process, was a good culture fit, and then they wouldn't get hired because like the role wasn't quite right. And in that case, they would want to re-interview them for a different role. And then sort of maybe they would have like another interview, or maybe they had go through another loop. I mean, have you seen that happen a lot from your experience?
Yeah, because there are two parts to the qualification. Right? There's the behavioral stuff, whether you exhibiting the right leadership principles, but there's also the functional skills. And so like as an engineer, you need to know how to code, you need to know how to do system design. So if you're coming in, let's say maybe you come in with strong system design skills, but you don't have coding skills, well, you wouldn't be a good fit for an engineer, but there might be other roles within the company that you may qualify for. So like TPMs, for example, they're higher level, so they don't do coding day to day. They still need system design skills and other skills like, project management, etc. Mm-hmm. So somebody could be a good fit for that depending on their skill sets, like their functional skill sets.
Got it. Cool. Okay. So that's not uncommon then sometimes.
No, yeah. I mean, we try to find a position. I mean, there's both down leveling. So like if somebody comes in and interviews for a higher level and they don't make it, but we're like, hey, they actually exhibited all the right data points for a lower level, we'll still extend an offer at that level.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we're hiring for the company and not a specific team. So like if a specific team doesn't have an opening for that level, we can still find them some other team that can hire them at a lower level.
Do you know, I mean, I don't know the stats around this, or if you have this, like, do people accept those offers? Because if you use the word down leveling, it just has this connotation like, oh, like I'm going in for a lower level than what I was going in for initially, and that doesn't make me feel good. How do you reframe that?
That's a term we use internally, so I don't know. I mean, it's really just being extended an offer at the level they were assessed to raise the bar at, right? That's maybe the more correct way to frame it. And having said that, like, that happened to me, right? I when I was coming in, I thought I was going to come in as an L6, but that was mostly because I didn't have the right understanding of the levels at Amazon. Mm-hmm. The fact that I was down level in no way affected my decision to accept the job offer, because I was still getting paid a lot more than I was getting paid before. And so, like, the levels themselves don't mean much outside of, I know people think of levels as like a way of assessing themselves, but it's really just making sure that you're going to be a good fit for that role. Because if somebody comes in at a level higher than what they should be, they're probably going to fail and they're going to have to quit the company, or they're going to be like, put on a PIP, or they won't be successful. So it's not about just like, it's not like a reward. It's really making sure that the fit is good for the candidate and they can be successful in that role and level.
Yeah, for sure. And you're going into a completely new company that's super fast paced and you're the greatest at what it does. And so if you're going in like a bit too high, like that could be very stressful, and you're setting yourself up for failure, rather than go in at your level or around there, and then you have room to grow.
And there's no way to like drop a level after you've started. So it doesn't make sense to overshoot it and then to struggle, because you can only
Yeah,
get promoted internally if you like truly are, if you truly prove that you can quickly accelerate and quickly learn and come up to speed, you can always get promoted to the next level.
for sure. I wanted to ask you also just about culture, because I think we had like a few years ago, you had like the New York Times article, all these people coming out talking about Amazon's work culture and how it's yeah, pretty rough and not a great work life balance. And I think with a company with 1 million people, it's like, yeah, there's going to be people that are upset, but also, you know, it could be reflective of partly reflective of reality. So I would love to hear sort of your thoughts on that and like your experience, because you were there for a long time. So like I'm sure there were stressful moments, and you had colleagues who left. And um, what was it like in terms of the balance there and like that mentality around just mental health and stress and all that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the New York Times article came out, I think, within a year or two after I started, and
Okay.
it was interesting because at the time we're still a pretty small site, but it is a big company, like you said. So I don't discount those experiences. I'm sure, like in any company, there's going to be different experiences for people in different parts. Now, what they have done is over the years, they've created better policies that make sure that if you're not happy in a team, you can move more easily to other teams. Um, like for me, when I interview candidates, I would always tell them, you own your own career and you own your own kind of work-life balance, your own happiness, right? And if you're not getting that from where you are, you can always move to another team or even another company if that's what it takes. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but like for me, I've always had pretty good managers, and I would discuss this kind of things with them, and I would set my own boundaries, right? There are
Mm-hmm.
definitely times when like it's crunch time before release, and we need to work a little bit extra time. But even in those cases, I feel like it's somewhat voluntary in the sense that, a lot of people would work extra hours, not because somebody told them to, but because they feel that's what's in their best interest, or that's how they can accelerate their career. And it's really up to the person to like set those boundaries for themselves and be like, I'm feeling burned out. I'm not going to do this.
Yeah, it's really tricky. I think you mentioned a really good point about setting boundaries, and there's definitely a sort of self awareness and level of maturity that correlates to this, right? If you have no boundaries and it's like your first job and you just throw yourself into it, then yeah, you could get burnt out, and especially if your manager is also, you know, maybe quite new. They're not necessarily going to support you as much as a more experienced manager or leader. So there's definitely these situations where it could just spiral out of control. But like you said, yeah, if you do have the balance of like setting your own boundaries, then it doesn't seem like people are pressuring you necessarily, right? You feel like you have that sense of freedom internally to do what
Yeah,
you
what
want.
you said is right, because the people that I noticed the most, the ones that had the most problems with setting those boundaries are the more junior people, because I think there's still this mindset of you have to work like extra hard and all these extra hours to prove yourself, even though that's not like that's not true. At least from my point of view, being an L6, I got to see how people were being reviewed at review time, like what people being assessed on, and it was never a discussion of has this person put in extra hours. Right?
Mhm.
That's not a factor that's being considered. I think it's more about just maybe an overall kind of impression of the industry that in order to move up, you have to work crazy hours. Like personally,
Yeah.
I worked 40 hours a week, and I would tell other people around me like, "Why are you working extra hours? Like, pull back to 40 hours." You know what I mean? And like at my level, I could easily work, twice that much if I chose to. Like the higher up you are, there's more stuff to do, but you just have to get better at prioritizing and pushing back and saying, you know what, this is all I can handle right now.
Yeah, I mean, since it has become a bigger issue, not just for Amazon, but just like in general, right? Especially after the pandemic, I wonder if Amazon's doing anything more deliberately now, just as part of their training, or just having that conversation, right? It's like, hey, like, you know, we find that people coming in, especially the first 90 days, they tend to overstress themselves. Like, here are some ways to prevent that. Your manager's
Mm.
going to support you. I feel like just even having that conversation could be pretty impactful.
Well, I mean, there are the the leadership principles that came out last summer, right? And one of them is really talking about doing the right thing for the people, right? Making sure that it's not only about delivering stuff, but it's also helping employees make the right decisions.
It only took him like 20 years to make that principle.
Yeah, and I mean, I left shortly after that came out, so I can't speak to like how that got integrated into the culture. But I think it was a move in the right direction. It was probably a response to the fact that they wanted something, not necessarily to measure, but to evaluate. Like people should be evaluated against how good a work environment they create, on top of just the projects they deliver, and how well they work together, etc. So not necessarily that people weren't doing that before. It's just when you have that as part of the leadership principles that are guiding the company, it's easier to make that a topic of conversation, I think, for the teams.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just sorry, jumping around here a little bit. It's something I've heard about teams within Amazon, and not specifically engineering, just in general, is that it can be quite competitive between teams because you have different products that you're launching. You don't know if that product is going to succeed or fail. Like you had the phone, what is it called? The Fire phone or something?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So like, there's a bunch of stuff, right, that just doesn't, it gets out the door and flops. But how competitive is it internally for like resources and just in general? Like, are you competing with do you feel like you're competing with other teams at all?
I never felt that way because it's not like we were competing for resources for different teams, because maybe at the higher leadership levels when they decided where to direct kind of headcount and stuff like that. But from within a team itself, like you have your teammates, you have a project you're working on, you really kind of working independently from other teams. I mean, you collaborate, when there are reasons to collaborate. Like if you, for example, your system depends on some other system, but it was never a case of like either we get to build this or somebody else does, right? I'm sure those decisions are made at a higher level, but once they are made in planning, like you don't experience that day to day.
Okay. Yeah. So you didn't feel that. Okay, cool. So let's shift gears, talk a little bit more about the interview preparation, because that's something, obviously you've interviewed a lot of people and you've also been coaching a lot of people, friends, and also more professionally as a career coach. So talk to me more about how you do that and what I'm sure you've seen some patterns already from talking to hundreds of people. Like, what are the approaches that you take that you find are most successful, and sort of what patterns do you see?
Yeah, I like to keep things simple. I think a lot of times it's easy to overcomplicate the preparation process, which makes it more stressful. And so, I just keep it to kind of three basics. The first is having the right technical knowledge. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there are certain things you can improve in the interview preparation process, and there are certain things you can't, right? You can practice some lead code questions and maybe get a little bit better at coding problems. You can't change your work experience and, introduce a new project that you haven't done. So it's really about not stressing out about the things you don't have and just working on putting forward your best foot. So it's, doing the technical stuff, so preparing for coding and for system design, and practicing those, because somebody with great knowledge of system design or even coding can still fail an interview because they don't know how to manage their time properly, or they don't know how to talk their way through a problem, how to vocalize things instead of kind of keeping it internalized. And so it's not just the hard skills, it's the soft skills that really make or break an interview. Then the second piece is behavioral interviews, LPs, and it's the same thing, right? You could have a great experience, but if you don't know how to frame your experience in terms of what the interviewer is looking for, again, you may not succeed. So it's really just practicing those skill sets. And it's practicing it not just with like a coach like myself, it's also practicing on your own. Because I think a lot of times people come in and they expect that, I'll kind of do the work for them. And my job as a coach is to guide them, because I can't like learn that, how to interview for them. And so usually we'll create a plan around it where it's like, we'll do some sessions, but then you go practice in between to really solidify those skills. Like, I'm here to unblock you, to help you, guide you in the right direction, but you have to be committed to the process and the preparation. Yeah, and the third piece that kind of encompasses everything is the presentation, right? Is knowing how to communicate well, clearly, concisely. The one area where a lot of people struggle, especially on behavioral stuff, is doing too much talking, presenting too much information that's not relevant. And again, given the limited time frame, if you're using too much time on one aspect of the interview, then that means you're losing the benefit of that on a different section. Like if you're talking too much about behavioral, you're losing time for your coding problems.
So yeah, you help people be a little more concise in their explanations and practice that
Yeah, so like
one-on-one
time
sort of
management is
thing.
very big in interviews because if you don't pace yourself, you're not aware of how much time you're taking up, you can easily just run out of time, right? Run out of runway. And then no matter how gifted technically you are or how good experience you have, you don't have the opportunity to present that in the interview.
Yeah, I wonder how many people that are going in for a technical role are failing the interview because of the behavioral stuff, right? Because I sense that it's not hard to get lots of job applications for a big company like Amazon. Sure, they get millions of applications, like great engineers, but like you said, like just because you have that skill set doesn't mean you have the skill set of interviewing or talking through those things. And partly, I sometimes I feel like um, is it just a game that you have to learn how to play, or is it really representative of how you're going to be working on the job? Um, you know what I mean? Because like you were talking a little bit before about that and how you want to pretend like it's already your job and going and talk to a colleague and all that. Um, but yeah, so sometimes I just wonder about
Yeah, it's a
that
little
and
bit of
how
both.
true that is. Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely a part of it is just presenting the right data in an interview, but communication is an essential skill, especially a company like Amazon. I don't know how much you've heard it, but like they don't do PowerPoint presentations.
Right.
Everything, like all the meetings are centered around one pagers and six pagers, basically document. And so if you have a new project you want to pitch to leadership, you write a one paper document and you pitch it. And you can't use weasel words. You can't be like big and like, successful and all this. You have to present real hard data. And so in that sense, like you can tie the interview process back to that is when you're communicating within the company, you always want to communicate in a data-driven way and a very concise way. So you don't want to provide, too much detail that doesn't actually communicate anything. You want to focus on the things that matter. And so if you prepare for interviews in that way, you're definitely going to use that skill in your day-to-day job as well.
Yeah, I like your usage of weasel words because it's just like fluffy words without anything to back it up. And yeah,
And it's not
I
intentional,
wonder,
right? A lot of times people do it. It's not because they don't have, like most candidates have something hard they can talk about, but by presenting their background in that way, they make it seem like they don't, because it seems like they're trying to cover for something when they're really just not aware of it. And that's really where coaching comes in, is like having that self-awareness to fix that behavior.
Yeah, I'm really curious. Do you think the writings, the writing sample, right? So there's like you have to do a 1 or 2 pager writing sample as part of sometimes as part of the interview process at Amazon. Are those writing samples pretty similar to or representative of how a internal like memo looks like or one pager?
Yeah, I mean that's the whole point of the writing exercise. Today,
Okay.
I think it's only required for management, for people in management.
Okay. Okay.
There was a point in time when it was required for engineers as well, because you do communicate within the company, like whether you're an engineer or a manager. Now, as a manager or like a TPM, you might do it more often than an engineer because you have to present things a lot more often to leadership, whereas engineers, most of the time, they'll present it to other engineers and sometimes to leadership. So it's a more essential skill for people on management track, but it's used by everyone. And so the better your written communication skills are and verbal, the more successful you're going to be, especially at the higher levels within the company.
Got it. Awesome, man. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think we're coming up on time here. And I wonder, is there anything else that we missed or anything else that you'd like to share with listeners about Abzon, your experience, the interview process, or anything else at all?
I mean, the only thing I can say is, and this is a little more general, but build your career intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And that starts at the interview process and goes all the way through to being in the company and then moving up, and like really make the choices that fit you the best. Yeah, and because one thing that I've seen people make mistake on is they get into the company they want to get into, but they're not intentional about what they do after that. Like people focus so much on the interview process because it's almost like a badge of honor, right? I got into FAANG. But a lot of people don't think about why they're trying to get into FAANG. They just want to have that on the resume.
Yeah, it's just the goal. It's like, oh, get in, and then now what?
Right. And
Yeah.
that also ties into the point of don't treat the interview process as a thing on its own entity, but tie it into your longer term goals, like into being successful on the job and what things do you want to accomplish. Because if you view it that way, then it becomes less stressful because you're not just doing this thing you don't want to be doing just to kind of get the check mark to get in. You're building your career starting in the interview process. And you're going to be much more motivated and passionate about doing it versus just a task, a chore you have to do.
Awesome, man. Yeah, I think that's really good advice. Take control of your career. Don't just apply to companies randomly and try and get into cool companies because
you won't be happy. I mean, you might get in, but you won't be happy for too long.
Yeah, and then there's people around you who are really smart and really passionate about what they're doing. So it's just, it's not going to feel right too. So, cool, Matt. Well, I really enjoyed this. I appreciate your time. I will, of course, link back to your coaching profile so people can chat with you and check you out. And yeah, Matt, hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, I'd love to chat with anybody that's interested in coaching or have questions about Amazon.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, appreciate it.
All right. I hope you enjoyed listening to that conversation with Roman and some of his insights on what it's like to work at Amazon as an engineer. As usual, I will share a link to his coaching profile. So if he's someone you want to connect with, have a quick chat with, get some advice on the interview process, or maybe just sort of your career pivot or sort of career options when it comes to working in tech or being an engineer, then I think Roman is a great guy to speak with. He's mentored hundreds of people and continues to be a mentor and coach, and is also working on his own startup right now in the coaching space. So really, really recommend that you speak with him. If you have any comments, feedback, questions, I'd love to hear what you thought about this episode. So please drop me a message. If you are watching this on YouTube, then you can leave a comment. If you are listening to this, then you can drop me an email. My contact info is in the show notes. So I think that about wraps it up for today. So I hope you have an awesome rest of the week, and I will see you next time.